You said in an article that you wrote recently, new report shows devastating costs of mass deportation. You wrote this in October. Do you remember this piece?
Yes, that is a summary of our report that we published
so
in
in this
October.
piece, and it's also in your written testimony, you talk about how much the economy will lose if the United States actually enforces our immigration laws and deports folks who are here illegally. And I want to quote you now. You say some industries would be particularly hard hit, including construction, agriculture, and hospitality, which combined would lose more than 2.5 million workers. What's the argument here, that there aren't American workers who are available to do those jobs?
No, and as I said previously, there likely are, but the issue is that
and you don't want their wages to rise?
I think that we want to pass a path to citizenship so we can have a level and fair playing field for every American.
Why would you want American citizens and those who are here lawfully to have to compete against illegal immigrants who, by the way, are often paid not minimum wage, who are not given the federally mandated benefits precisely because they're here illegally? Why would you want to drive down the wages of millions of working Americans who can't get those jobs in construction, agriculture, and hospitality because illegal immigrants are getting them? Suppressing wages in the meantime. Why would you want to do that?
Well, if you'd been here for my initial testimony, you'd know I don't want that.
Oh, listen, I read your testimony word for word, and I've been watching it, and I know what the answer is. You don't actually care about working people because you're absolutely hell-bent on this ideological agenda of opening our border. You want to give everybody who's here a path to citizenship. You want blanket amnesty. You talk about mass deportations. That's your word, not Trump's. You want mass amnesty, right? It's right here in your testimony.
We want a path to citizenship for people who pass a background check, who pay a fine.
That's amnesty, who you just said is millions of people, 13 million people. Right, 13 million people you want to dump into the labor force.
They are already
who will drive
in the labor force,
illegally.
Senator.
They're here,
yes.
taking jobs from American citizens. And so, perfect. So here's your plan. So just if you're wondering, America, here's the Democrats' plan. Take the 13 million plus illegals who are here, taking jobs from Americans, taking wages down, taking health care benefits, and bring them here legally so that they can continue to drive down wages, flood the labor force, and suppress
Senator
all of
Hawley,
the above.
they can't flood the labor force if they're already part of the labor force, which is the economic issue today. They are
flooding the labor force now. That's what's happening now. Why do you think wages have flatlined?
The majority have been here for over 15 years. Many millions have been here since the Reagan administration.
And what has happened to working class wages in that time, Mr. Reilchlin-Melnick?
Working class wages are currently going up. Yes.
Oh, really? They've gone up over the last 15 years?
Over the last 15 years, I will have to consult the economists on that matter.
Yeah, they're down, way down. What world do you live in?
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Aaron Reilchlin-Melnick, and I'm the Senior Fellow at the American Immigration Council. At the Council, we have long studied the population of immigrants in the United States and provide detailed estimates of their demographics and economic contributions on our Map the Impact website. Today, there are at least 13 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. President-elect Trump has promised a mass deportation campaign with the stated intent of rounding up and deporting every single one of them. So who are they? Well, most have been here for at least 15 years, having entered before the Obama administration. Over 4.8 million people have been here for 25 years or more, with no path to permanent legal status, no line for them to stand in. Most undocumented immigrants have spent decades living, working, and putting down roots, all at constant risk of deportation. Nearly all are either employed or attending school. Some have permission to work legally. Most do not, putting them at increased risk of exploitation. They are farm workers, meat packers, cooks, waiters, construction workers, factory workers, delivery people, home health aides, nurses, teachers, artists, writers, musicians, entrepreneurs, and yes, even lawyers. Undocumented immigrants are also more than their jobs. They are parents, spouses, partners, brothers and sisters, grandparents and grandchildren, loved ones and friends to millions of U.S. citizens and permanent residents. 5 million U.S. citizen children have at least one undocumented parent. In an average public school classroom of 25 children, at least 2 have an undocumented immigrant parent at risk of deportation. While President-elect Trump talks about targeting criminals, over 90% have no prior criminal record whatsoever. Of the small minority that do, the most common prior convictions are traffic offenses or immigration offenses. Efforts to ramp up deportations would sweep in tens of thousands of people each year who have no or minimal criminal legal system contact. We know this because this is what happened during the first Trump administration. When there were no enforcement priorities, everyone was an enforcement priority. And the single largest group of that increased arrests under the Trump administration was people with no criminal record. Beyond splitting families apart, a mass deportation campaign would be a costly mistake for American taxpayers. When we account for the enormous capital investment, infrastructure, and hiring necessary to arrest, detain, process, and remove 1 million people per year, we estimate that mass deportations would cost $968 billion in total, enough to instead construct 2.9 million new homes or fund Head Start for 79 years. Mass deportations would also cause economic chaos. As millions are expelled, the U.S. population and labor force would shrink. So too would the economy. Prices would rise in sectors with significant undocumented workforces. Building, maintaining, and repairing houses would become more expensive, as would groceries, restaurants, travel, and childcare. Every American would feel the pinch of inflation. Overall, we estimate that a mass deportation campaign would lead to a loss in total GDP of 4.2 to 6.8%, at minimum as much as the Great Recession. And just like then, many Americans would lose their jobs. Even an attempt to deport millions of people will have repercussions. After all, undocumented immigrants are not just producers, they're also consumers. Collectively, they hold over $250 billion in annual purchasing power. If millions are deported or otherwise forced to leave, American businesses will close not just from a lack of workers, but also from a lack of customers. A large-scale mass deportation campaign will also increase exploitation while it is carried out. Unscrupulous employers will dangle deportation over any of their workers who dare to push back, and will have the full force of the U.S. government to support their threats. But mass deportation is not the only option. Congress could instead create a new path to permanent legal status, allowing many people already living here to file an application, go through a background check, pay a fee, and get their papers in order. When the Council studied the impact of Reagan's 1986 amnesty, we concluded that legalization would be the cheapest federal workforce development and anti-poverty program for children in history. It would also raise overall wages, create new jobs, increase tax revenues, and create a level playing field and fair competition for U.S. workers. The president-elect's mass deportation plans would crash the American economy, break up families, and take a hammer to the foundations of our society by deporting nearly 4% of the entire U.S. population. But Congress has a choice. Instead of going down that path, we can instead crack down on exploitation, strengthen millions of families, and build American prosperity by providing undocumented immigrants a way to fix their papers. The choice is clear. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. I have to say, I'm kind of amazed that we're holding this hearing. To me, it's remarkable that the idea of actually, as you were just saying, Ms. Morin, the idea of enforcing our laws, protecting our border, securing our streets from criminals, it's amazing that that's controversial at all. And it says something a lot about the other side of the dais that we're having this hearing today. Let me just ask you, Mr. Reilchlin-Melnick, I mean, is it really such a bad idea to deport people like the criminal who killed this young man? This is Travis Wolf. He was 12 years old when he was killed. He was mowed down, and I do mean mowed down, in a car by an illegal immigrant, 12 years of age, walking along a sidewalk in my state of Missouri, mowed down by an illegal immigrant who I think also had a prior criminal record. Is it such a bad idea to deport the person who killed him?
Any person who commits a heinous crime should suffer the consequences under the law.
Good. What about Officer David Lee? Officer David Lee was killed in Missouri just a few months ago by another illegal immigrant, once again in a car, who used it as a lethal weapon to ram him and kill him. Is it so wrong, such a bad idea to deport the illegal immigrant who killed this good man?
Again, any person who commits an awful act should face the full force of the law.
We've had multiple stabbings in the state of Missouri at laundromats in O'Fallon, Missouri, where innocent civilians were going to do their laundry of an evening and were attacked with knives, slashed, bled, stomped upon? Should the illegals who did that, should they not be deported?
No, as I said, if you commit an offense, you should face consequences. But the overwhelming majority of the 13
We've
million
had
people
officers
here
assaulted
today
in
have
Kansas
not
City on the
committed
other side
any
of the
offenses.
state who have been assaulted by illegal immigrants. One officer required over 100 stitches to the head, a police officer, earlier this year. Should the illegal immigrant who did that not be deported?
Again, they should face the consequences of the law, but they are a very small minority of the population that President Trump is promising to deport.
Well, let's talk
13
about the
million
rest
people.
of the people who you don't want to be deported. What world do you live in? Listen,
Senator Hawley,
here's the deal. The American
familiar
people
with the
just
phrase,
voted.
"Don't
The American
cut off your
people
nose to
just
spite your
voted.
face"?
Well, you know what? It's my time, not yours. So you're here to answer my questions, not to offer a soliloquy. And let me just end with this. The American people just got a good look at your economic program, and they voted against it. We've had an open border for the last 4 years. We have had de facto amnesty, as you yourself just said, for the last 15 plus years. It has been a disaster. People have died because of it. Wages are lower because of it. Our streets are in chaos because of it. And now you and the Democrat Party just say more of the same, more of the same, let's double down. I would just say to you, I think that's insanity. I think it's total insanity, and the American people do too.
Senator Hawley, we have a choice. We can either hurt the economy or help the economy. And if we want to deport 13 million
It hurts the economy to give American workers jobs?
Senator from Texas.
This topic, this issue, is certainly complex. It doesn't do the issue and the challenge justice to just say, well, there's so many immigrants in America, or some people say illegal, some people say undocumented immigrants in America, when you really must break it down into a number of categories. Are there some number that beyond being in the country undocumented may be involved with unlawful activities? Yes, and I don't think you're going to find Democrats saying we shouldn't be pursuing actions against violent criminals. But when Senator Graham also suggests, but I hope we can take care of the dreamers. Dreamers, as you all know, young people who were brought here by their parents at a very young age, but have grown up here and are undocumented. Are they also on the target list for deportation, or not, because we look at them in a different category? I've had Republican colleagues want to cooperate and collaborate on legal status and pathways to citizenship for farm workers, for example. And I get back to them and other essential workers in America, but just because you're undocumented, does that mean you are on the target list? Yes or no? Or are we going to have the maturity and act responsibly to kind of break down a complex conversation? Because, number one, yes, Democrats believe we need an orderly, safe, and humane border. Number two, yes, we should not hesitate to pursue enforcement actions against violent criminals. But let's be clear what we are talking about today. This hearing is on the eve of the next Donald Trump administration. And we've heard him for months and months and months now throughout the campaign trail promise mass deportations. We heard him over and over again commit to, quote, the largest deportation operation in American history. And we've had big ones. For folks watching at home, Google Operation Wetback and begin to do some homework. We've even heard Donald Trump say that there will be no price tag for deportations, and heard him promise on Truth Social to use the United States military to execute it. Now, I can already hear some of the rebuttals from Republican colleagues to suggest that, well, he doesn't really mean all immigrants. He's only talking about violent criminals. Well, I wish I could believe that he's only committing to targeting violent criminals, because we agree on that front. But pardon me if I'm skeptical, we've seen him. We've seen Donald Trump in the past and how he operates. Do you remember the Muslim bans he imposed early in his first term? And the family separations at the border that we witnessed for years? So I've seen enough to know that while he may plan to prioritize, in effect, he will be targeting all undocumented immigrants, which will inevitably include those without criminal convictions of any type. Now, previous administrations of both parties, we saw some stats being presented. It's been the policy of previous administrations to prioritize the deportation of those with criminal convictions. But what we're hearing from incoming President Trump isn't that. And look at who he is putting in these pivotal roles to help him execute. A loyalist in Christine Ohm at DHS, extremist Stephen Miller as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, and Tom Homan as border czar, who told undocumented immigrants through the press, quote, "You should be afraid," end quote. Dreamers, farm workers, that's the message. And he promised worksite raids to prosecute anyone who stands in their way. They're pushing an extremist agenda. On top of the fact that, like, separating spouses and ripping away children from their parents, citizen children from sometimes undocumented immigrant parents, isn't just cruel. It's not just morally wrong. Here's another very important reason why Americans should be concerned. For anybody whose vote this last November was motivated by high prices of food, of housing, of anything else, understand that the mass deportation Donald Trump is describing will be disastrous to our economy. Again, I'm not trying to justify those involved with criminal activity. We're on all the same page there. I'm talking about nonviolent criminal, undocumented immigrants. It is all of us, the American people, who will pay for the extremism policies that he has promised. Put aside the millions and millions and millions of dollars to find undocumented immigrants he may be targeting, to detain, and to remove through the process of deportation. For a minute, don't even count on the funds that would be necessary to hire thousands of Border Patrol and ICE agents, let alone the cost of constructing detention centers and jails for this operation. Let's focus on the impacts to the economy for American families. Because the fact is, there are millions of undocumented immigrants living in the United States today who are working in industries critical to our entire economy. Undocumented immigrants make up nearly 15% of all construction workers, for example, and roughly half of our agricultural workforce. Again, if you care about the cost of housing, you care about food prices at the grocery store, you should be paying attention. Because if tomorrow Stephen Miller could snap his fingers and have his way, our annual GDP would drop roughly 6.8%. Imagine all the losses of the Great Recession and then still shrinking the economy another 2.5 points. So what does that mean for folks at home? It's simple. Any industry with a significant percentage of undocumented immigrants will have a harder time finding workers. And I know we've all been hearing from employers and business leaders for years now about their struggle already to find sufficient workforce. Stores will have a harder time keeping the shelf stocked, and yes, prices will rise and rise and rise. So hello, America. Get ready for a more expensive food bill when you're preparing next year's Thanksgiving dinner or next year's Christmas dinner. And if you've been saving up for years and years to try to buy your first home, get ready to wait even longer, because construction will slow and prices will go up. So the next time we hear Republicans say that they support Trump's plan to deport waves of undocumented immigrants, let's be clear about what comes with that. Higher prices for American families. They're supporting the forced removal of millions of hardworking community members 80% of whom have lived here 10 years or more. These are not recent arrivals. People who have lived here for years, if not decades. They're supporting fear and uncertainty in immigrant communities that will cause untold numbers of immigrants, no matter their status, to stay home from work, from school, from shopping. And they're supporting the punishment of over 5 million workers who Donald Trump's own administration declared to be, quote, essential to our economy. Essential workers who fed us and kept us safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you agree with the spirit of at least that segment deserves better, then colleagues join me in supporting the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, the essential workers that the Trump administration deemed critical to our nation's economy and security. Let's provide them with some legal status up front and a pathway to earn citizenship because we need them. Our economy needs farm workers. I think you'd agree. Our economy needs construction workers, hospitality and transportation workers, healthcare workers, and students and innovators who help keep our economy and our country thriving. We don't need the massive deportations that the political rhetoric of the campaign cycle has brought us. And we certainly don't need the uncertainty, the fear, and the loss that we'll feel for years to come.